Welcome to another episode of Scaling Up, a podcast where we focus on how small to medium-sized business owners can scale their business. As we all know, scaling business for sustained growth is the ultimate goal for many leaders, but it's no small feat. The real challenge lies in balancing the demands of growth while ensuring your business is operating efficiently and your people are thriving. Today, we're diving into the fascinating intersection of HR and sales processes, two vital cogs in any business's engine, and how streamlining them can unlock major opportunities for growth.
You're listening to Scaling Up, a podcast for business leaders.
I am thrilled to have with us today Amy Ferguson, an expert in human capital management, HR, payroll, and finance for small to medium-sized businesses. Amy's mission is to, quote, free smart people to work on hard problems. And today she's going to help us unlock the secrets to scaling a business while empowering your people and keeping operations running smoothly. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, John, for having me. I'm excited to talk about this topic and hopefully provide some little tidbits or nuggets for folks to take away today.
Yeah. I think the real crux of what will be important today and informative for those that are listening is that there's a confluence of value in looking at HR and people management with sales in specific. Certainly other aspects of any business have those intersections as well, but I think focusing on this one is maybe not talked about as much as it could be. So before we get into some of the specifics, interested just a little bit in your background. You've built a career helping business owners get out of the weeds and focus on the big picture. Can you tell us a little bit of how this led to this point in your career?
Sure. So I got to go back a little bit. I actually spent almost 10 years in the fitness industry. I actually was a personal trainer for many years and then kind of wanted to get into something that would be more impactful for a larger group of folks. And so I actually got into the corporate wellness space. So what I did during that time was helping employers actually provide like ancillary services like a discounted gym membership or wellness education to their employees. That was a really fun job. Went to a lot of health fairs, hosted a lot of boot camps for, so really got a chance to work with HR professionals in a different capacity where we were focusing on, how a healthy employee is a more productive employee. So that was really our focus. Unfortunately, as I'm sure many people listening can relate, the fitness industry took a dive during COVID. A lot of gyms closed down, and unfortunately, our position at the company was eliminated. So the corporate wellness team was not what they felt was, the primary importance anymore. I mean, I think they were struggling at that point just to keep the doors open. So corporate wellness sort of took a back seat, and unfortunately, that job was eliminated. So I had to spend some time thinking about things I was passionate about, things that I wanted to do. And I realized I spent a lot of time working with HR folks, CFOs, like with employee benefits and things like that. And so kind of fell and got into the payroll space, started with ADP. Gosh, it's been about 5 years now. Worked for a couple of competitors out there. And so, realized that, payroll obviously isn't the same as employee wellness. But by streamlining processes in payroll and in, managing your employees from hire to retire, it does allow folks in HR and small businesses to really focus on other things, right? So, not just focusing and worrying about people getting their paycheck, which is obviously really important. So that was really how I got into the space.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up where you started in the health and wellness area. That's an area that certainly gets a lot of attention, but in particular as it relates to sales, even back in the day when there were such things as actually going out to see clients in person, what a concept. uh, that you would well, people handle it differently, but there was a real effort required to make sure that you kept yourself in shape. Getting up in the morning, jumping in the car, driving off to appointment, 1 through 5 for that day, whatever the case might be. It's not necessarily a great environment for doing what you need to do to keep yourself healthy. And then, oh, by the way, you're taking clients out to lunch or dinner or whatever. And it just was tough to keep up with what you needed to do for your own health. Those days, have changed certainly, and you've got different issues today. But it's interesting that you started out that way and then have morphed into areas that are still absolutely critical to making sure employees are healthy and certainly present in making sure they're doing their job.
Yeah, there's so many pieces that employers, that, I think people don't even think about, things that are important in running a business. And sometimes those things seem small. I mean, like, you wouldn't think payroll would be such obviously it's important. Everybody's got to get paid, but, thinking about making it easier is something that I don't think people put together, that it really ties in everything the organization is doing. So,
yep. So there's a piece of that I want to explore a little bit more around, particularly around, whether as it relates to sales. Sales, particularly in complex type of sales environments. There's the issue of compensation packages and figuring out your bonuses or your commissions, et cetera, that feeds into payroll, and that can be a very complex set of processes if not done right. And if the salespeople feel that they need a degree in calculus to figure out how they should get paid, it tends to be a problem. But let's hold that thought for a moment, and just move to another aspect of, I think, where you bring value, and that is when you see a company trying to scale and a business owner trying to put the right processes or metrics or strategies in place. Where do you think owners typically get stuck between HR and sales processes, and how can we help them? How have you helped them in the past?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times small business owners are so focused on, and they should be, by the way. They shouldn't. They should focus on why they started the business, what's important to them, their why, right? Like, I started this business because of XYZ, right? So they should focus on those things. Unfortunately, what happens along the way is the HR piece kind of falls to the wayside, right? It doesn't really become something that they see as important. And what some of them don't realize is that, HR, compliance, employee experience, those things are all vital to them continuing their business, making sure that they're following all the rules correctly, making sure they're not getting into situations they shouldn't be in. And then, on top of that, I think sometimes what's challenging is that business owners have a hard time kind of giving up control. So I know a lot of business owners I've spoken to, they worry about outsourcing payroll, right? Like, I don't want to give this to somebody else, and I want to make sure that I have it here. They want to keep it close to them because they worry about the process, or they worry about, they don't see how, them spending hours a week on payroll is not helpful for them to grow their business. Like, we're here for a reason. There's these payroll companies exist for a reason. And we want to be able to take those manual tasks off of your plate so you can focus on why you started a business, whatever that reason may be.
Yeah, and that intersection of HR and sales comes into play in numerous ways and at numerous times throughout the longevity of any given company. Things like making sure that you have the right people in the right seats, as an example, and making sure they're incented properly. And I go back to the comment I just made that if salespeople, I'm generalizing here, but salespeople generally react to two dimensions, fame and fortune. They like to make money, and they like to be recognized for their efforts. And that probably is true in most other types of dimensions of a given company, but certainly in sales. And if you have made it complex for a salesperson to, one, know how they're getting paid, and two, actually getting paid the right amount, or in their opinion, the right amount, then you've got problems that are imminently avoidable if you haven't set up your processes properly, your HR and your sales processes. So again, that intersection is actually critical between those two dimensions. So
Yeah, and I actually came across a statistic as well. I was trying to put together a few more. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why businesses can be helped by a better system, a better process, better integrations. There's a lot of reasons, but I actually came across a very interesting statistic, and that was that 50% of employees will actually start looking for a new job after just 2 payroll errors. So that's an interesting thing to think about. It's like, you know, yeah, if the onboarding experience isn't there, if like you said, if the paycheck's wrong, salespeople, they're motivated by money, right? Like you mentioned, fame and fortune. Those are two very important things to most salespeople, myself included, right? If my paycheck's wrong and there's problems, or it's really challenging for me to get paid or understand that process, like I'm probably not going to want to stick around. So those are things that business owners really do need to think about as they are growing their business.
yeah, 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 excellent points. And that statistic is, I'll say, eye-opening. Certainly, two cycles, and then they're looking for a new job. That doesn't give you a lot of flexibility to make sure you get it right, because you have to. Oh.
It doesn't.
So you work in areas that are fairly resource heavy typically, but there are ways to offload that. You've talked about this already, and unburdening that resource heavy load, if you will. What ways can a small to medium sized business streamline those processes without sacrificing quality or compliance?
Yeah, so if you really think about it, it starts from the onboarding process, right? If you have multiple systems that are not connected, you've got, let's say 4 or 5 different systems that an employee has to go in and enter in information in, or it doesn't flow, or they have to enter data in multiple places. Not only can that be a frustrating experience for the employee, but it also is creating a lot of work for the employer. So as an employer, I have to worry about making sure all this data is correct in multiple different places. The systems aren't speaking to each other. That a lot of times is what we're trying to solve for when a business owner is talking to us about a payroll evaluation. Hey, right now, we're having to do onboarding in multiple systems. Employees, it's not a streamlined process. And then as you move past onboarding and you're talking about getting into payroll, the integration piece comes into play as well, right? So if I have employees that are, enrolling in benefits, let's say, and maybe the benefits are not syncing up with payroll, now I, as a business owner or HR professional or payroll administrator, whoever you are, now every time I run a payroll, I have to go into the system and enter manually, okay, Johnny has a $40 deduction, Jessica has a $20 deduction. I have to go in and manually do all that. So not only is that time consuming, that's taking time away from my day. Now, now I have to spend time doing this manual entry. That could be all solved by a better payroll system, a better, that offers integrations. Or maybe with 401k, maybe I'm using a 401k platform. It's not integrated with payroll. That's another manual entry that I have to do, right? So now there's a couple things. It's employee experience, but it's also how much time are you spending, And not only that, but think about the potential for errors as well, right? So if I'm a human, there's a chance that I'm going to get this wrong. And then that leads to what we just talked about, that statistic about if my paycheck's wrong, I might start looking for another job because I don't really feel like the company's maybe competent because they keep getting my paycheck wrong.
Right. And all the more important as an owner or a leader in a small to medium sized business tries to scale that company, right? I mean, some of those manual things can be, I'll say, forgiven if it's a company of whatever 2, 3, 4, 5 people.
Sure.
But as soon as you try to get to 10, 20, 30, 50 people,
Yes.
the manual burden becomes untenable. And if you haven't
That's right.
automated that or streamlined it, you're getting yourself into some problems. So getting that worked out early is better, I'll say, than
not to mention, sorry to interrupt you there, but not to mention, it's a lot easier for me to, I can't tell you how many times, I think you and I talked about this before, how many times I've talked to a business owner and maybe they only have 5, 10 employees, but one of their goals is scaling, right? Like, hey, I want to double in size by next year. Great. What's your pay? Well, right now I'm spending 4 hours a week or 4 hours a couple times a month on my payroll. Okay, well, why wouldn't you outsource that process? Well, I'll look into outsourcing that once we've grown. And it's like, well, it's actually going to be harder for you to make the switch when you have 20 employees than when you have 10, right? So why not make the change when you have 10 and then it's easier to grow and then you don't have to worry about that process later on.
Yep. Yeah. So would you say that that's one of the major issues that small businesses run into when they're trying to scale, is when to make some of these fundamental changes and
definitely. I think that there's kind of a misconception, not in every case, but in a lot of cases, that we're too small and, we don't need help or we don't, it's not important. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, it's still something that should be important, should be a priority. And, and I think some business owners don't really, they think it's going to be too expensive. And the reality is, like, there are a lot of systems and platforms out there that are very well priced. That is 100% worth you not having to deal with your own tax filings and your own, the cost of the system is definitely worth it. You don't have to do the manual entry. You don't have to pay the taxes. Like, you don't have to do W-2s at the end of the year. Like, there's a lot of benefits in having a payroll process system in place. So yeah, I do think a lot of times they think I'm too small. When I get bigger, it'll make more sense. But in reality, it's easier to do it when you're smaller.
Right. Yeah. So your tagline is freeing smart people to work on hard problems. And I was really intrigued by your coupling of those two elements. That really makes a lot of sense to free up the people that have the energy, the passion, certainly the insights to take on larger issues so that they're not stuck in the day-to-day muddiness of what we've talked about as far as handling those issues. So you've talked about a couple of them, but can you share a specific example where you've been able to shift that focus away from the administrative tasks and have them handled?
Yeah, I've worked with, there's a million examples I can think of, obviously, but to kind of narrow it down, I mean, I had a construction group I was working with, and they were doing most things manually, and you'd actually be shocked the number of companies that are still even using filing cabinets. Like, I still have a paper, form that I'm going to put into a file cabinet, and it's not going to be electronic. But this gal, she was a one-man show. She was doing HR, she was doing payroll, she was kind of wearing a bit of an operations hat, a controller hat, and that's really common in a small company. You might have somebody who's doing 5 or 6 functions. And she really wanted to focus on things like culture. She wanted to focus more on like offering team events and things like that, but she couldn't because she's spending all of her time, doing things manually and by paper. And honestly, it was a really tough sell. It was a really tough sell. It was like a family-owned company, and they'd had a bad experience in the past, and that's unfortunately also what happens. You have a company like that. They give outsourcing payroll one opportunity. They go with whoever, and it doesn't go well. And then they kind of go, I'm never going to do this again. And the example I used was, well, let's say you bought a car. Maybe you bought a Jeep. Let's say, just putting it out there, and the car broke down, didn't work anymore. Something happened. Does that mean you're never going to buy a car? Or because you had this one bad experience, or you just going to kind of paint the broad brush of, well, all payroll, all outsourcing is bad because I had this one experience. And I used that example with them, and that really resonated with them. They're like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. It's like, okay, you can't just paint this broad brush of, every payroll company is bad because I have this one experience. So fast forward, this gal, we ended up bringing them on as a client, and she was able to focus more, kind of shifting away from, paper filing. And other things she was spending a lot of time doing was helping employees sign up for benefits. She was having to, if an employee came to her and said, hey, I'm buying a house, I need you to print out my paycheck stubs. She was having to do that. These employees had no capabilities of their own to use a system to pull their pay stubs or find their information. Like, they had to come to her for everything, and that was taking up a lot of time. So fast forward, she was really able to focus more on having those company events and focusing on culture and performance reviews and really kind of building up staff. And they did see a big difference in their growth. They were able to actually grow and bring on more folks because they put in a process that eliminated a lot of that manual work that she was doing.
Yeah, it's amazing how much manual processes are still out there, as we talked about before, and your example as well. So in sales, there's a lot of technologies that are available for helping to automate and make more efficient various stages of the sales process, just to pick an example. One of the things that has come about, I'll say somewhat lately, although it's been around for a little bit, is as an example, the ability for automatic note takers. So, these are technologies that let you record a session, an online session. A lot of sales calls nowadays are made via Zoom or, whatever your technology is of choice, but remotely, and then relieving the attendees to turn on their note takers is a game changer. Obviously, you need to make sure everybody knows that you're recording the session. But in my case, what I do is I take that recording and it actually gets automatically put into my CRM as the notes for that meeting. So now I've got an automated record of what goes on. Same thing with sending out emails. They can automatically record it too. So, not that long ago, 3, 4, 5 years ago, if I was a sales manager and I wanted my sales team to record their activities, all those things were separate events. They had to put their notes into the CRM. They had to send out the email. They had to, write a follow-up note, whatever the case might be. And they were all disjointed activities that now can be combined into one, maybe two things that then get populated into these various systems for documenting what's going on, and that's critical. What I'm wondering is, are there game-changing technologies that you see, whether it's for HR, HCM, payroll, benefits, that are similar. You mentioned logging into your benefits plan. That's one where you can go to one stop and get various updates and make changes to how do you want your contributions to be put into 401k as an example. But are you seeing anything along those lines that is either here or coming that might be game changing?
Yeah, so obviously a big thing right now that a lot of payroll companies are adapting is AI, right? So the use of utilizing that is obviously coming and will continue to be, incorporated more and more. A lot of it's been around for a long time, but I do think dashboards, things where the employee or the employer can log in and at a glance, they're seeing everything, that's going on in their workforce. Obviously mobile applications, everybody has a mobile application nowadays, so that's not really new, but kind of allowing managers to do things like approving hours on the go, or allowing employees to log in and out, or allowing them to enroll in benefits on their mobile device, or allowing them to do onboarding on their phone. That's not something you could do years ago, right? So now everything's really on the mobile application. So expanding that mobile application is obviously really important. Just making things more accessible, via phone, making it more accessible for the employee. So a lot of those things are here. AI is obviously going to start playing more of a role. But, I think now another thing that's been really important is integrations. I talked about integrations earlier a little bit. Integration can mean a lot of things. I think people throw the word around a lot. But, as a business owner going through an evaluation, really asking, well, actually two things. The first is really thinking about, I have business owners ask me, what about XYZ integration? Or do you integrate with this system or that system? And the first question I always ask is why? Like, what data do you really feel like is in this system that needs to integrate with your payroll system? Like, what's the why behind it? And how's that going to kind of help you? The second thing is understanding fully what integration really means. Integration could mean a lot of things. It could mean, I'll give you a good example. So Proliant, the company I work for, we integrate with point of sale systems for restaurants. We work a lot with restaurants, franchise groups. We integrate with companies like Toast, right? So that allows, things like tip pooling, hours to kind of move back and forth. So that would be an example of a very strong integration. Integration can also be, we're just connected, but, maybe there's not a lot of data flowing back and forth. So really being able to ask those questions to, whoever you're talking to on the payroll side, like really understanding what data is moving back and forth and why. Because a lot of payroll companies will throw around that word integration, but what does that really mean? Is it actually helpful or not? Because, just because integration's there doesn't mean it's necessarily going to help you in your business.
Yeah. Just having the technology for the technology's sake is
exactly,
not all that helpful if it doesn't fit into your, your business plan and your sales plan and your growth plan. So, something a little, maybe a little off of the topic that we've talked about so far, and just touch on a little bit about human capital management, if we could, because it just came to mind that talked about making sure that you've got systems in place, that you've got the right people in the right seats. As an example, onboarding we've talked about. So from just a pure sales perspective, and I'm going to simplify this bit. So you've got the recruiting phase, if you will. Then you've got the onboarding and management of the employee as they pursue their career in your company. And then you've got situations, unfortunately, where maybe the person isn't in the right seat, and you need to make a decision on what to do with that person. And so in my experience in trying to manage that whole spectrum or journey, if you will, of bringing people on board, finding the right people, bringing them on board, making sure that they're doing their jobs, and then making decisions on whether, maybe some other position is best for them. I'll just throw it out there. One of the things that, in my mind anyway, you need to make sure is done is setting clear objectives. So if you are hiring somebody for a particular position, what's the right profile that you're looking for that is going to increase the likelihood that that person is going to be successful? So in a sales role, there's a lot of different types of salespeople. It's a transactional sale. It's a long-term strategic sale, take a long time to ultimately get us up. Those are different personality types that fit better into those definitions, and there's others as well. So there's trying to define your ideal persona, if you will, that you want to hire. What are the right metrics? Then managing to those metrics that you've established in the hiring process, and then making decisions on whether or not that person has, over a period of time, fulfilled their requirements to meet expectations in that position. So any advice there from an HR or HCM perspective that can help an owner scale up and make sure they're accommodating that growth when it comes?
Yeah, so I think that HCM or human capital management can really help with creating a positive workplace culture, because it can help you utilize technology to identify those gaps in capabilities. It can help create systems to measure performance, right? So one of the things you can do is, utilizing employee reviews or surveys, and that can provide you some real-time feedback, how was the onboarding process? Are there gaps in training? Are employees happy? Do they like the job? What do they not like? Do they like the management? In terms of retaining, there's a lot of tools out there that can allow employers to stay on top of, benchmarking, right? So what are other companies paying people in the same positions? Are they paying better? Am I competitive? Am I offering a competitive compensation package? So that can be another piece of it. But yeah, those are just some tools that I think, an HCM system can help the company determine how well people are performing, and really to get a good pulse on the organization quickly and in a timely manner.
Yeah, absolutely. So just going back to a couple of things we've talked about already, automation, we spent a fair amount of time on. And one of the, I'll say, knocks on automation is that it can remove that human element to, any type of culture or environment from a business perspective. So if you are implementing automation to make your business more effective, trying to get it scaled up, how can you try to maintain that human element so people still enjoy coming to work?
Yeah, I think that there's always ways to keep the human touch. I mean, the systems are going to automate to a point, but there's always ways to ensure that there's still going to be human touch. And I don't think it ever takes away from, an HR person, yeah, I can have automation, but, there should still be an option for, maybe me as a new employee. I still want to be able to talk to somebody in HR if I have questions about, I just went through my own onboarding process. It was fully automated, leaving room in there for, for me to maybe still connect with the HR person after to ask questions. Or, I think there's still a way to automate things and streamline things and still let employees know, hey, we're still here if you have questions or if you don't know how to do something. We don't want to ever take that away. So I think it's all about communication. And yeah, this is automated, but we're also still here if you have questions. I think I've heard of cases where, you have somebody, especially in the remote world, right? I think it's harder in some ways because now maybe you have employees all over the country and they're not, down the hall. It's harder for me to check in with them, to have a situation where, you're sending them like an onboarding link and they're going through that process completely electronically. Maybe setting up a call with them the following day, to check in and how was the onboarding process? I think there's still ways to automate business practices, but still have that human touch. I don't think it has to be all or nothing type of experience.
Well, looking forward, in addition to what we may have already touched on, do you see any trends or trajectories on the horizon that business owners should be aware of when it comes to managing people or scaling efficiently?
The only thing I really see now is just, the utilization of more AI to kind of, solve some of those business issues and things like that. But otherwise, I think, um, and business owners at the end of the day are just trying to find the best way to grow, at a reasonable cost, the best way to retain talent. And I think that by utilizing a good payroll platform and a good HCM, technology, that is one of those things that maybe doesn't always get considered as they're thinking about their day-to-day practices. So I would just encourage business owners to, have a conversation with, local folks in your area. Happy to reach out to myself as well if you have questions specifically around, hey, I'm a business owner. I want to know how this can truly help my organization scale. And I know people would be happy to share those practices with them. So yeah, I think it's been awesome to talk about this topic today because I do think it's something that people know they need, but to really understand the why behind it. So it's great to have a little more discussion around that.
Yep. Well, Amy, this has been such an insightful conversation. I want to thank you for your time. I think our listeners, especially those trying to scale their business, will walk away with some really valuable strategies. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. How can people get a hold of you if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, of course. So, happy to provide, you can certainly provide my email contact information. I don't know how I can provide that to you to get out to listeners, but happy to also share, my LinkedIn profile as well. If people would like to connect with me on LinkedIn, I usually like to share articles and connect with a lot of folks in the industry. So happy to share that information as well.
Great. Well, it's always nice, having guests that are available for follow-up conversations or calls, or certainly insights that go beyond what's covered on the podcast. So, listeners, if you've enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcasting platform. We've got more great conversations coming your way, so be sure to tune in next time for more insights on scaling your business for long-term success. Until then, keep pushing forward and working on those hard problems. Thank you.